Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are diving into something absolutely fascinating, how the exact same set of facts can completely change the decisions we make just based on how they're worded. You might think you're making perfectly rational choices, but are you really? Or are you just reacting to the way a choice is packaged up and presented to you? Well, we're going to look at some brilliant insights from behavioral economics to see exactly why our brains are so easily tricked by framing.
Section 1. Words that change reality. Let's kick this off with a quick thought experiment to show that your brain doesn't just process pure logic, it processes associations. Think back to the 2006 World Cup final. Logically speaking, the statements "Italy won" and "France lost" describe the exact same outcome, right? If one is true, the other has to be true. But emotionally, they trigger completely different memories. Hearing "Italy won" makes you think of the celebration, the triumph. But "France lost" that instantly brings up the defeated squad and, probably that infamous headbutt by Zidane. They mean the exact same thing logically, but your brain processes them in totally different ways.
And this perfectly highlights the difference between what economists call econs and what we are, humans. See, econs are basically rational robots. They only care about objective reality. They don't care about the words used to describe it. But us humans, we rely super heavily on our fast, emotional System 1 brain. We're totally bound by the associations that words trigger, which makes us incredibly vulnerable to how things are framed.
Section 2. Inside the framed brain. So what's really wild is we can actually see this bias lighting up inside the human brain.
In this brilliant study over at University College London, neuroscientists gave people 50 pounds. They then asked them to choose between gambling it on a wheel of chance or taking a sure outcome. But here is the trick. They messed with the labels. Sometimes the sure thing said keep 20 pounds, and other times it said lose 30 pounds. Now, do the math. Keeping 20 from 50 is exactly the same as losing 30. It is the exact same objective reality. But people were way more likely to take the sure thing when it used that positive word, keep, rather than the negative word, lose.
The brain scans from this were just striking. When people fell for the frame, going for keep and running from lose, their amygdala, the emotional center of the brain, was highly active. Emotion was literally driving the bus. But when subjects resisted the frame, when they chose the sure thing even when it screamed lose at them, their anterior cingulate lit up. That's the conflict and self-control area. It literally took neural conflict to beat the wording trap and do the math. And the most rational subjects? The ones who weren't fooled at all, they showed heightened activity in their frontal reasoning area.
Section 3. Life, death, and framing. Let's scale this up and look at literal life or death decisions. Imagine for a second that you're a patient, or maybe even a doctor, and you're looking at statistics for a lung cancer treatment. You have to choose between surgery and radiation. I want you to go with your gut as we look at the data.
You get one of these two descriptions for the surgery's short-term outcome. Either the 1-month survival rate is 90%, or there is 10% mortality in the first month. Even though these describe the exact same reality, one feels incredibly reassuring. 90% survival sounds great, but 10% mortality, that sounds absolutely terrifying.
Now, you'd probably think advanced medical training would protect you from this kind of language trick, right? Wrong. When they tested this exact scenario on Harvard Medical School physicians, 84% chose the surgery under the survival frame, but only 50% chose it under the mortality frame. Just swapping the word survival for mortality caused a massive shift in professional medical recommendations. Even highly trained experts get fooled.
We see this exact same thing with the famous Asian disease problem. Public health officials are facing a hypothetical outbreak expected to kill 600 people, and they're given two identical programs. When the outcome is framed as saving 200 lives, they play it totally safe. They lock in the sure thing. But frame that exact same outcome as 400 people will die for sure, suddenly they become wild risk takers, preferring to gamble just to avoid those guaranteed deaths. Same outcome, completely reversed decisions.
Section 4. The moral intuition trap. The really crucial point here is that framing doesn't just mess with our math. It actively manipulates our deepest moral beliefs. Take the famous Schelling tax dilemma. I want you to answer this in your head right now. Should the child tax exemption be larger for the rich than for the poor? It seems completely unacceptable to favor the rich, doesn't it? Your moral alarm bells are probably ringing right now.
But economist Thomas Schelling pointed out that the way we write tax law is completely arbitrary. Currently, the default is a childless family, and you get an exemption for having kids. But what if we just rewrite the default to be a family with 2 kids?
Under this new setup, families with fewer than 2 kids have to pay a surcharge. So answer this one. Should the childless poor pay as large a surcharge as the childless rich?
Again, you probably reject this immediately. You absolutely do not want the poor paying the same penalty as the rich. But look at the logic. You can't reject both. The difference between the tax paid by a childless family and a family with 2 kids is just math. If you intuitively want the poor to get the same benefit as the rich for having kids, logically, you have to want the poor to pay the same penalty for being childless. It's the exact same cell in the math matrix.
This exposes a pretty startling reality, summed up perfectly in this quote. Our moral intuitions are about descriptions, not about substance. We really feel like we have these deep, unshakable moral convictions about the substance of things like the tax code, but those feelings are actually just attached to the arbitrary frames describing the reality, not the reality itself.
Section 5. Building better frames. Okay, so how do we actually use this to pierce the illusion and build better systems? Let's dive in.
Let's say you're going out to a play. In scenario A, you open your wallet and realize you lost the $80 tickets you already bought. Do you buy new ones? Most people say no. Your brain puts that loss into a specific play mental account and tells you, hey, the play basically costs double now, it's not worth it. But in scenario B, you haven't bought tickets yet. You just lose $80 cash from your wallet. Do you still buy the play tickets? Most people say yes, because cash comes from your broader general revenue mental account. To be more rational, we actually need to adopt that broader frame. The cash is gone either way, so don't let a narrow mental account ruin your night out.
Or think about the MPG illusion. Adam upgrades his massive gas-guzzling truck from 12 to 14 miles per gallon. Beth upgrades her eco-car from 30 to 40 miles per gallon. Intuitively, jumping from 30 to 40 feels like this massive environmental win compared to Adam's tiny little 2-mile-per-gallon bump, right?
But if we wake up our logical system 2 brain and actually calculate the gallons used over 10,000 miles, the truth comes out. Adam's tiny truck upgrade actually saves 119 gallons of gas. That is way more fuel saved than Beth's massive 10-mile-per-gallon eco upgrade, which only saves 83 gallons. The miles-per-gallon frame is mathematically misleading. Framing it as gallons per mile is a vastly superior way to show reality to consumers.
But maybe the absolute most profound real-world application of this science is organ donation. This whole system relies entirely on the laziness of our logical brains when we face a default frame. Are you given an opt-in form, where you actually have to take action and check a box to become a donor? Or are you given an opt-out form, where you're a donor by default and you have to check a box to refuse?
The data on this is just staggering. By simply making the paperwork an opt-out checkbox, Austria hit a near 100% donation rate. Meanwhile, their culturally similar neighbor, Denmark, used an opt-in form and sat at a really low 4%. These massive, literal life-saving differences aren't about deep cultural values. They're purely the result of how one single default question is framed.
So how do you protect yourself? You have to actively reframe your problems. When you face a setback, intentionally change your reference point. Instead of hyper-focusing on a narrow loss, broaden your mental accounts. Like the quote says, charge the loss to your mental account of general revenue. You will feel better. Broadening your frames is how you avoid getting hijacked by emotional wording.
Which brings us to a final, really important question to ponder. What major decisions in your life right now are being controlled by someone else's arbitrary frame? The next time you face a tough choice or a strong moral dilemma, I really want you to pause, wake up that logical brain and ask yourself, am I truly choosing based on reality, or am I just reacting to the frame? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always look beyond the words.